What's happening, world? B Marsh Boxing back at it with another boxing video. You know what time it is. Fights we didn't get to see. This is one of my videos. Check out my playlist where I talk about boxing fights that should have happened with fighters in the same era. No, I'm not talking about a fight where would mythical type of matchups, who would win between Joe Louis versus Muhammad Ali, or who would win Mike Tyson versus Jack Dempsey, or who would win Marvin Hagler versus Cannoli, or Roy Jones versus Beterbiev. Nah. These are fights that should have happened between two fighters in the same era, but for some reason or another, the fight did not happen. So check out my playlist. I got over 40 videos I've probably done on fights we didn't get to see. You know, I'm talking about stuff like Ray Leonard versus Aaron Pryor, fights we didn't get to see, Darius Michikowski versus Roy Jones. Check out my playlist and hit the thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please share and subscribe, all right? Let's get into it, man. Speaking of eras, man, this is what we're getting into right here, right now. The Klitschko era, okay? These are two brothers from the Ukraine, you know what I mean? Two PhDs in sports science, hence why their names is Dr. Steelhammer being Wladimir Klitschko and Dr. Iron Fist being Vitali Klitschko. Vitali Klitschko, 45 wins, I believe 2 losses, and 41 KOs. While Wladimir Klitschko's record is 65 wins, um, what is he, 53 KOs and 5 losses, all right? Let's get into it, you know. Now, these two brothers from the Ukraine, Wladimir Klitschko was the one considered, the more highly touted prospect coming into the boxing game, especially coming off the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta, where he won himself a gold medal in the heavyweight division. Vladimir Klitschko, Vitali Klitschko was supposed to compete at the super heavyweight division in the Olympics, but he got kicked off the Ukrainian team because he tested positive for steroids. You know, so he's already coming into the game with the name of being a PED user. You know what I mean? Coming into the professional ranks. Okay, hence why the man Vladimir was more considered, you know, the natural prospect to go ahead and win a world title sooner than later. Okay, now Vladimir Klitschko on his way up in the boxing game, he took his first loss versus Ross Purity, a heavyweight journeyman at the time. You know what I mean? And you know Ross Purity, man, he stopped the man Vlad, I believe, like in the 9th round or something. And you know it was a big blow to Vladimir's career at that juncture, because that was a fight he was supposed to win. But one thing for sure, two things for certain, these two brothers definitely avenged each other's losses at some point or another, and we'll get into it as we proceed with this vid. Okay, so the man Vlad lost to Ross Purity, and he what's his name? Vladimir, his brother Vitali Klitschko, avenged that loss. He went on to beat the man Ross Purity, okay? And Ross Purity, I'm sorry, Vitali became actually the first fighter out of the two brothers to win himself a world title. Now, he got himself a WBO world title when he beat the guy from England named Herbie Hyde, stopped him in 2 rounds. And at that time, I'm going to keep it tall with y'all, man, the WBO title was not regarded as a real heavyweight title. I'm sorry, as a real title, period. You know what I mean? At that juncture of boxing, at that climate, there was only 3 world titles you needed to achieve in order to become undisputed: WBO, WBA, IBF, and WBC. Okay, so you know the WBO title was really fellas who really held them straps was fellas from Europe, you know, fighters from Europe and Puerto Rican fighters, you know, because the WBO is a sanctioning body that's headquarters are located in Puerto Rico. You know what I mean? So it was a lightly regarded world title, not even really regarded as a real world title, something sort of like what the IBO is today, you know, but that's what it is. So he got himself a WBO world title, okay? But he ended up losing that WBO world title to Chris Bird, you know what I mean? In a fight that he was beating Chris Bird, you know, very good competitive fight, but he was up on points, but he tore his rotator cuff in the 9th round. Okay, and he couldn't continue. So he quit on his stool, you know what I mean? So, you know, the man Vladimir Klitschko is really regarded at that juncture of his career as a quitter, you know what I mean? after he quit against Chris Bird, but never, no problem, Vladimir Klitschko went on to what you call it. He went on to to avenge his brother's loss. You know what I mean? And he went on to beat the man, Chris Bird. You know what I'm saying? He stopped Chris Bird. He got himself a WBO world title. You know what I mean? And I believe that's the second time so far that these guys have avenged each other's losses. First it was Vitali avenging his brother's loss to Ross Purity, and this time now Vladimir Klitschko beats the man Chris Bird, and he gets that WBO strap that the man Vitali had lost. Okay, so Vladimir Klitschko went on to lose that WBO strap to the South African southpaw by the name of Corey Saunders, and that was a big upset. He stopped the man Vladimir Klitschko. Corey Saunders did stopped him in 2 rounds. You know what I mean, and dropped him all over the floor. Silly, dropped him about 4 times with that left hand, straight left hand that could not miss. The man Vladimir Klitschko at this juncture of his career is showing that he has no chin. You know what I mean? That's just the truth about it. He seems like doesn't have the mental fortitude to handle big punches in the boxing game, and he's going down easily. I mean, Vladimir Klitschko's a guy who's, if I'm not mistaken, he's hit the canvas at least 14 times in his career. No shame in his game. That's just the truth about it. You know what I mean? Okay, this is when he fought Kurt Johnson. Okay, anyways, and actually, matter of fact, that fight, Vladimir versus I'm sorry, Vitali versus Chris Bird. I believe that fight. I think Kurt Johnson was supposed to be the one fighting the man, um, Vitali. Or all I remember is that the man Chris Bird was a late minute replacement. And as a late minute replacement, he pulled off the big upset, something sort of like what the man Andy Ruiz did with the man Anthony Joshua. Late minute replacement came in and upset the apple cart and got the dub. You know what I mean? So Vladimir is no longer the WBO champion. Vitali at this juncture now has gone through a couple fights, and he's actually fought the man Lennox Lewis in 2003 in a great fight, a fight where he did well for himself. Was beating the shit out of Lennox Lewis for 5 rounds, but by the sixth round, man, his face got busted up. His face got busted up, and he was leaking something silly. You know what I mean? His eyes got messed up by the man Lennox Lewis. And actually, that particular fight, the man did well for himself, but that was Lennox Lewis' last fight of his career. He retained his title and left out the boxing game as a heavyweight world champion, which very few heavyweight champions end up doing. You know what I mean? Even Muhammad Ali didn't leave out the boxing game as a heavyweight world champion. When it comes to actually, I have a video on my boxing channel. Just go check out my historical archives about all the heavyweight boxers that left out the boxing game as a world champion. You know what I mean? We got Lennox Lewis, fellas like maybe not Jack Dempsey, Rocky Marciano, Gene Tunney, and even Vitali Klitschko, as a matter of fact, left out the boxing game as a world champion. But let's continue. So by the time Vitali gets himself the WBC strap, oh, sorry, he lost that fight to Lennox Lewis. Lennox Lewis retired. Now the WBC strap is left vacant. And guess who Vitali Klitschko fights? He avenges his little brother's loss to versus Corey Saunders. Remember, Corey Saunders won himself the WBO strap, but he vacated that WBO strap because at that time, no sanctioning bodies were unifying titles versus what you call it. We're not unifying any titles versus any WBO titles. WBC, WBA, and the IBF were not consolidating or unifying titles with the WBO. So Corey Saunders vacated the WBO strap and fought the man Vitali in the WBC uh, for a WBC title, for a vacant title that was vacated by the man Lennox Lewis. And Vitali Klitschko beat the shit out of he beats the man what's his name, Corey Saunders, and he becomes now the WBC heavyweight champion of the world. Yet again, now this is the third time I've mentioned about brothers avenging each other's losses. So he avenges his little brother's loss, and he becomes the WBC champion. At that time now, Vitali Klitschko has had two losses in his career, to Ross Purity and Corey Saunders. He's got to work his way back up. And he does. He fights the man Samuel Peter in the IBF title eliminator. Gets dropped all over the floor. Something silly. I mean, by Samuel Peters just dropping Vladimir Klitschko all over the canvas. But Vlad ends up winning the fight via unanimous decision because he was really winning rounds, although the rounds he lost were the rounds he got dropped. I mean, so now Vladimir Klitschko is an IBF champ. He's an IBF champ by beating. Oh, sorry, no. When after he beats Sam Peters in the IBF eliminator, he fights Chris Bird, who was the IBF heavyweight champ at the time, because the man had beat what's his name, Evander Holyfield for a vacant IBF strap. I'm doing this all off the cuff, man, off the top of my membrane. You know what I mean? So I gotta jog my memory while I'm doing this video. But hey, man, this is how I like to do it, all authentic. You know what I mean? No box rec up. Just gotta go through um, my recollection of boxing when I was watching boxing in the Klitschko era. Okay. Now, Chris Bird loses. I believe he gets stopped in, like, I don't know, fifth, sixth round or something. And Vladimir Klitschko is now an IBF champion, holding his first world title. And at the same time, the man Vladimir Klitschko really only defends his WBC, and I believe it lineal, it might have been just Ring Magazine title, WBC and Ring Magazine title versus Corey Saunders. He defends that title only once versus the guy from England, the black dude from England named what's his name? Danny Williams, the guy who beat the man Mike Tyson. Could you believe that, man? The man Danny Williams has a dub over Mike Tyson. Yeah, I mean, that's something he could tell his grandkids, his children, it's crazy, man. But that guy was the last fight for the man Vitali Klitschko before now Vitali Klitschko retires. He retires, he's no longer in boxing. He leaves out the boxing game with nagging injuries, you know what I mean? The man had a bad back and all that, so he left the boxing game and he called it a wrap, you know what I mean? He left out the game in 2004 as a WBC heavyweight world champion. So Vladimir is the only one left in the boxing game. And mind you, as I do this video, fights we didn't get to see. We obviously didn't see this fight for obvious reasons. These two guys came into the boxing game proclaiming and saying that they promised their mother, that they would never fight each other in the amateur and or professional ranks. You know what I mean? So that's what happened between these two. And then but their mission in boxing was to consolidate and have all the heavyweight world titles. You know what I mean? But by 2004, with Vladimir retiring, they didn't have all the heavyweight world titles. The man Vlad had the IBF, and Vlad Vitali retired with the WBC. So now Vladimir is the only one left in the boxing game with one strap. He later on unifies with the man Sultan Ibrahimovic for the WBC strap. You know what I mean? I believe Ibrahimovic won that WBC strap for a vacant title versus Hasim Rahman, or beat Hasim Rahman. I remember they fought twice. You know what I mean? Um, and that fight was on HBO, man. It was in Madison Square Garden. You know what I mean? Vladimir Klitschko, man. But that fight was, he won by unanimous decision, very wide unanimous decision. But a lot of people didn't rate that fight. Pundits, critics, media, promoters, fans, thought that was a very lackluster, boring fight for the heavyweight division. And you know what? That was the last time the man Vladimir Klitschko had a fight in USA after a long time. You know what I mean? He took his business of operations. He took his fighting game all the way to Germany, where he was a big star over there in Germany, man, selling out 50,000 seats, 50,000 seats in the stadiums and the arenas over there in Dusseldorf, Germany, and Munich and all them places. And he became a big star over there and was getting more love and appreciation in Europe than he was getting in the United States. So he unifies the WBO strap, and this was actually the first unification in heavyweight boxing since Holyfield versus Lennox Lewis in the late 90s. You know what I mean? So it took about 8 years before there was a heavyweight unification. Vladimir grabs himself a WBO strap. Um, and then now he has IBF and WBO. And then he fights Ruslan Shagayev for a secondary tier WBA title. But he really fights the man David Haye for the big world title, the WBA Super World title in the infamous Tollgate fight. David Haye, he talked a big game about what he's going to do versus Vladimir Klitschko, only to run like a pussycat when it came to fight, talking about his toe, his big toe was hurting or something. And it was just a real disgusting effort from the man, David Haye. And I lost a lot of respect from him at that point in juncture of his time in his career because, that was a fight that was heavily hyped, especially by HBO because Vlad hadn't been fighting on HBO after the Sultan Ibrahimovic fight, but HBO picked up that fight with Vladimir Klitschko versus David Haye. You know what I mean? And it was a very disappointing fight, just like the Sultan Ibrahimovic fight. And Vladimir Klitschko did his thing, and he won wide. As a matter of fact, Vladimir Klitschko had also a loss. I forgot to mention a loss to the man Lamont Brewster. Yeah, I mean, he had lost to Lamont Brewster for the WBO title. Yeah, I mean, I believe it was for the vacant WBO title, and I believe that was his very first fight that he linked up with the man Emmanuel Stewart. Great famed Hall of Fame, one of the greatest trainers of all time out of Detroit, Michigan. Crunk Jim. I mean, the man Vladimir Klitschko was trying to, get back, refine, do some fine tuning of his boxing game by linking up with Emmanuel Stewart, who was a great trainer with tall, long fighters who have a lot of range. You know what I mean? And I believe his first fight with Vitali, he got beat up by Lamont Brewster. And that was before. I think that was before. That's for a WBO vacant world title, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I mean, and Lamont Brewster ended up losing that title to Lajkovic, guy named Lajkovic. You know what I mean? There's a lot of dubious characters in the 2000s, man. You know, 2000s heavyweight boxing. We'll get into that and the reason why I did this video. You know, but eventually the man in his title defense, Vladimir Klitschko, man, he became a world. He had a long streak of defending them world title straps. Between 2004 and 2015, he had no loss. That's about 10 years. You know what I mean? He didn't have a loss, and he avenged that loss versus Lamont Brewster when he was an IBF champ, and he stopped him. And Lamont Brewster retired on the couch, on the stool. I said on the couch. He retired on the stool, and you know, that was I believe in like the sixth round. You know what I mean? After Lamont Brewster had beat up Vladimir Klitschko in the first fight, dropped him all over the floor, silly. You know what I mean? Now Vladimir Klitschko has now unified three straps, and guess who comes back into the boxing game in 2008? Vladimir Klitschko. He comes back into the boxing game after a 4-year hiatus. 4-year hiatus, and he gets to fight the man Samuel Peter. Now, I believe Vitali Klitschko came into the boxing game to fight the world champion Samuel Peter with the WBC strap because I thought he felt that was going to be an easy lick. And sure enough, it was. You know what I mean? He just came into the boxing game after a 4-year hiatus, looked like he didn't miss a beat. And he stopped the man Samuel Peters, you know what I mean? And Samuel Peters, I believe he became a world champion. He had them type of fights with James Toney. You know what I mean? For the vacant strap, they fought twice. You check it, and Samuel Peter, man, was a very short-lived world champion. You know what I mean? In his first title defense, he lost to the man Vladimir Klitschko. So Vladimir Klitschko went on to keep fighting. I believe Vitali Klitschko fought between 2008 until 2012, and then he retired for good out of boxing, you know what I mean? And he had only two losses in his career to Lennox Lewis and to Chris Bird, you check it? So, with that being said, Vitali Klitschko, is still continuing. I'm sorry, Vladimir Klitschko still continuing his reign as a heavyweight champion. Mad title defenses, Brian Jennings, Tony Thompson's twice. He fought a whole lot of fellas. Yeah, what's the Kubrat Pulev, Povetkin. He just kept defending his world title till he finally lost that world title via unanimous decision in Germany to the man Tyson Fury, and which was a big, massive victory. This man dethroned a guy who had been a champion for 10 years, you know what I mean? And he was the mandatory for one of those straps, one of those three straps that he held, Tyson Fury was. And he went over to Germany and he beat him with a wide decision, you know what I mean? So, and that was actually the only loss on Vladimir Klitschko's resume that is not by stoppage. Every other fight he had lost, his four other fights, whether it's the Ross Purity, the Lamont Brewster, Corey Saunders. Yeah, I mean, I'm forgetting one more person. Um, every single fight he had lost was via stoppage. You check it. Um, oh yeah, Anthony Joshua, his very last fight of his career was also via stoppage. I mean, so every single fight he had lost was via stoppage, except the Tyson Fury fight, which he lost via unanimous decision. Okay, so Vitali's out the game. Vladimir's fought his last fight of his career versus Anthony Joshua, and that was like almost 2 years after the loss to the man Tyson Fury. So let's talk about it. You know what I mean? Who would win this fight? Fights we didn't get to see. Vitali was a tall dude, man, about 6'8". Dude was a tall dude. Oh, and Vladimir's a tall dude, about 6'6". I mean, but at the end of the day, both fighters are brothers, and both of them have extremely difficult. I'm sorry, different styles of boxing. I'm saying very different styles of boxing. The man Vladimir Klitschko had like a 81-inch reach. That's a pretty long reach. You know what I mean? When we talk about long reaches in boxing, I think about Lennox Lewis, um, fellas like what's his name, Sonny Liston. You know what I'm saying? But you know, Vitali Klitschko was a much more rough and rugged fighter. You know what I mean? I think had more natural instincts as a fighter. Didn't really need to be taught how to be a fighter. Unlike the man Vladimir Klitschko, who had to do some fine tuning, especially when he got with the man Emmanuel Stewart. I think he was the more gifted fighter. Vladimir Klitschko, technically sound, sweet science type of guy. Beautiful straight right hand, beautiful jab, nice left hook, nice footwork. I mean, but his chin, man, his chin was very bad in my opinion. He had a glass jaw, unlike Vitali, who had an iron cast jaw. I mean, look at that uppercut he got hit with by the man Lennox Lewis. Look, even Corey Saunders was catching him with big shots, and he was eating them joints. I mean, them fellas definitely had a more tough, more rough and rugged physique, while the brother was more of a textbook type of fighter, a boxer. You know what I mean? Pure boxer. You know, guy who gauges distance extremely well. You know what I mean? Not a guy who really goes to the body, but keeps his range in perfect. He keeps a perfect stance, dictates the range and predicts it pretty well. And he's also a guy who clinches like a motherfucker. I mean, he's a safety first type of guy. He's a smash and grab. He'll catch you with the 1-2, jab, 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 1-2, and then hold you, clinch. So it doesn't really give fighters this. And this is now the Vladimir Klitschko when he got with the man Emmanuel Stewart. Vitali Klitschko. It was more of a natural fighter. He's a guy who was also a good kickboxer, and he's a guy who ain't never ever ever hit the canvas. Never hit the canvas. Never had his back or his ass on the canvas. Never been dropped. Unlike Vlad, who's been dropped 14 times in the boxing game. You know, so I think Vitali is has more tougher mental fortitude. Yeah, I mean, and is willing to go to war more than the man Vlad. Vlad wants to keep it safe. Will will go the distance if he has to. He has a nice KO ratio, at least 76%. But Vitali is more like of 87%. I mean, but overall, I think in their careers, definitely Vladimir Klitschko, win, lose or draw, he fought the better fighters. I think the best victory on Vitali's resume is who? Who's his best victory? He doesn't have too many great victories on his resume, man. You could easily say a Corey Saunders or a Sam Peters or something. You know, maybe Shannon Briggs. I don't know. His resume is not the greatest. And Vitaly Klitschko's resume. I'm sorry, Vladimir resume. It ain't the greatest, but he's got some good W's like over Chris Bird. You know, he lost to Joshua. He lost to Tyson Fury at the end of his career. He was a 40-plus-year-old man at that time, at least 41. But you know, who's Vladimir Klitschko's best W? It's tough to say, man. But he did fight fellas like Povetkin, Kubrat Pulev, and I believe these guys, even if they weren't real world champions or world champions at all, these guys are better than these guys that the man Vladimir fought. Mahmoud Char, uh, Eddie. What's the guy's name from Pittsburgh? Eddie somebody. I'm forgetting his name right now. Eddie Chambers. You know, um, the Vladimir's Vitaly's Klitschko. His resume is kind of thin. As far as W's, he did fight Lennox Lewis, great fighter, but he lost the fight. But that's a good name under his resume, but he didn't win the fight. So we talking about their best victories, and I think ultimately Vitali Klitschko. I think it goes like this, right? The Vitali Klitschko era from when he fought Lennox Lewis, Chris Bird, all the way till he retired the first time in 2004. Man, that guy fought Danny Williams, Corey Saunders. That guy mollywops his little brother. He'll beat the shit out of him, and he'll probably stop him in 3 to 4 rounds. You know what I mean? And I think that if he was fighting for real, and not fighting with emotion and fighting like that's my little brother, he'll beat the shit out of Vlad. You know what I mean? Because Vlad was just his legs, man, and his chin. Once he gets tapped on that jaw, man, it's a wrap, man. I still don't understand how he survived the Samuel Peter fight. But then Vladimir Klitschko between '08 and let's say 2012, when Vitali retired, fighting fellas like what's that the Mexican guy's name, Ariola, these type of guys. I think that Vladimir Klitschko, gives his brother a great fight, and it's possibly going to be a split decision. It could go all the way the distance. You know what I mean? And it could possibly be a split decision. You know what I mean? Because at that juncture of his game, Vitali Klitschko, was on a serious roll in boxing. Like I said, he hadn't lost in a long while. While them fellas, you know, Vitali Klitschko, he's fighting guys like Chris Ariolas and Kevin Johnsons. He beat the shit out of Shannon Briggs, put that man in the hospital, damn near killed that man, and that was one of the few fights. And I think also Derek Chisora. He fought Derek Chisora, but Derek Chisora was very inexperienced at that time. You know what I mean? Derek Chisora had only like 15 fights under his belt. You know what I mean? While the man Vladimir Klitschko was on a serious roll, fighting the fellas like David Hay. You know what I mean? Of course, he beat Sam Peters a second time. Um, fellas like Hasim Rahman. This a guy who had beat Lennox Lewis. So between '08 and 2012, right? That Vitali Klitschko, I'm sorry, Vladimir Klitschko versus what's his name? Vladimir Klitschko would have been a hell of a fight, you know what I mean? And I think that fight could go either way, you know what I mean? But just prime for prime, skill for skill, sure, of course, dude had a longer career. Vlad. I mean, he had a longer career, didn't have no serious injuries like the big brother did, but very difficult to call, But I think if they had to fight, just prime for prime, skill for skill, you know, I think just the mental fortitude of the man Vitali wins the fight. You know what I mean? Vladimir Klitschko, the way he fought that man Tyson Fury was disgusting, man. It was like that man was scared for his life. Like this guy got into his head, and he just took him out of the game, took him out of the fight. You know what I mean? And it was a terrible effort from him. And if that could happen, and he was a champion who had reigned for all those years, yeah, Tyson Fury got a long reach. He's a taller dude, and he runs his mouth. But the mental fortitude, and this is boxing. You could have all the skills in the world, but if you can't sustain and just keep yourself into the fight, even for the duration of 12 rounds, you're going to lose. And there's nothing that showed me in Vitali Klitschko's career that he's doesn't have the mental fortitude. I'm not going to label him a quitter when he quit against the man. Uh, what's his name? What's his name? Chris Bird. Yeah, he was up on points. And look, maybe at that time too, he had never faced this type of adversity, and he decided not to continue with that torn rotator cuff. And I know how it is to have a torn rotator cuff. And believe you me, I wasn't. Mine's happened playing basketball. You think I picked up or dribbled a ball immediately when that joint happened and said, "F that, man, I'm going to continue"? No, no, man. I stopped playing ball for like 3 months. I had to let that joint heal. You know what I mean? So I gotta give it up to the man Vlad. I think I'm sorry, Vitali gonna win the fight, but there's two different eras of these guys. That first era before Vitali retired, that guy beats the shit out of Vlad. But then the second era between '08 when he comes back versus Sam Peters and finishes his career versus Mochar, that's when Vladimir Klitschko was in his bag and he was knocking out everything in front of him and just, you know, clinching and holding, sure, not very much aesthetically pleasing type of fighter, but he was dominating. 19 title defenses, you know what I mean? I think only Joe Louis and Larry Holmes have more title defenses than Vlad did. So that one, I think it would go possibly the distance, but Vladimir Klitschko to me has more power. Now, let's talk about the era. These guys' resumes are not that great because that era of heavyweight boxing was one of the worst heavyweight boxing eras I've ever seen in my life. And if I got to go back from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, the 2000s was the weakest, can't compare it to the 90s, the 80s. I mean, we got Mike Tyson, Larry Holmes, two legendary fighters. There was a lot of fighters who got world titles in there in the 80s, A lot of them didn't hold the titles long, you know, but the 70s was a great era. 60s was a great era too. So the 2000s didn't have those great fighters. Yeah, I mean, and unfortunately for Vladimir Klitschko and Vitali, that is the era they competed in. And they had a chokehold on the boxing game. And with that being said, I've got to give it up to the man, Vitali Klitschko, possibly winning this fight prime for prime. He's going to win this fight via stoppage. Probably a ninth round stoppage. Vladimir's going to try his best, but the mental fortitude and the punching power and the natural fighting instincts of the man Vitali will win him this fight. Be March Boxing, leave your thoughts and comments, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Check out my playlist. Leave your thoughts and comments on who you think will win this fight between Vladimir Klitschko and Vitali Klitschko. Dr. Steelhammer versus Dr. Iron Fist, prime for prime. Who wins? Gone.